Warning, the following ZipRecruiter radio spot you are about to hear is going to be filled with F-words.
When you're hiring, we at ZipRecruiter know you can feel frustrated, forlorn even, like your efforts are futile, and you can spend a fortune trying to find fabulous people, only to get flooded with candidates who are just fine. Fortunately, ZipRecruiter figured out how to fix all that. And right now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/zip. With ZipRecruiter, you can forget your frustrations because we find the right people for your roles fast, which is our absolute favorite F word. In fact, 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day.
Fantastic!
So, whether you need to hire 4, 40, or 400 people, get ready to meet first-rate talent. Just go to ZipRecruiter.com/zip to try ZipRecruiter for free. Don't forget, that's ZipRecruiter.com/zip. Finally, that's ZipRecruiter.com/zip.
Knoxville, Tennessee, December 5th, 1864. Major General George Stoneman stands over a pine plank table in the parlor of the Lamar House Hotel. The room smells of damp wool and coal smoke. Sleet needles the window panes. Spread before him is Special Field Order Number 139, signed by his immediate superior, Major General John Schofield, and endorsed by the War Department. 3 lines are underlined with thick graphite. Proceed with all possible celerity. Destroy the saltworks, the lead mines, and the railroads. Leave misery to the rebellion wherever you pass. George Stoneman is 51. He's tall-shouldered, spectacles slipping down his nose, and he reads the words aloud to his brigade commanders, Alvin Gillum, Stephen Burbridge, and William Palmer. They know the stakes. Grant is hammering Petersburg. Sherman is burning his way through Georgia, and Sheridan owns the Shenandoah Valley. If Stoneman can rip out the last threads of Confederate supply in the Appalachian back door, Lee's army may starve by spring. This is Chris Mowry, and this is part 2 of our look at the Saltville Raids here on Stories of the Civil War. In part 1, we looked at the first and ultimately unsuccessful raid on Saltville that culminated in the Saltville Massacre, the killing of black troops as well as a few white soldiers serving alongside them who had been left behind after being wounded during the raid. Now we're going to look at the ultimately successful raid that the Union launched in December of 1864. The plan was elegant in its brutality. The force was going to be roughly 5,700 sabers, Gillum's hard-riding East Tennessee men, Burbridge's Kentucky troopers grim for redemption after their first failure, and Palmer's veteran 15th Pennsylvania, known as the Anderson Troop. Artillery would include 2 4-gun mountain batteries, 3-inch ordnance rifles light enough to lash on mules. The logistics included 1,500 pack animals, each issued 14 pounds of oats and a double ration of shoeing nails. Every cavalryman carries 40 rounds for his carbine, 30 rounds for his pistol, 3 days hardtack on his person, 7 more in the wagons. Medical wagons are stripped to ether, chloroform, and lint. No room for cots when speed is your shield. Stoneman traces the route with a forefinger on a map. Northeast out of Knoxville along the East Tennessee and Georgia Railroad, slash the tracks at Strawberry Plains, cross the Clinch River at Bean Station, over Poor Valley Ridge into Virginia. His targets are circled in red: Abingdon, Wytheville, Marion, and, radiating like the heart of a dark star, Saltville. Each town's rail depots, bridges, and telegraph offices are annotated with demolition notes like use torpedoes, burn ties, or bust boilers. Weather is the first enemy that needs to be overcome. Quartermasters warn that December roads can drown a horse to its hocks. Stoneman replies simply, ice will not stop cold steel. The second enemy is intelligence. Scouts report that Confederate General Basil Duke commands no more than 2,500 defenders in the area, and many of them are raw militia. But the guerrillas under Champ Ferguson, who were such a problem the first time around, are still haunting the ridges. Stoneman issues Standing Order Number 1, quote, no stragglers, columns close, pickets doubled, Scouts in pairs. We ride fast or we do not ride home, end quote. The final preparations take around 4 days. On December 10th, before first light, Stoneman mounts at the head of the column. A staff officer records his only spoken words at this moment. "Gentlemen, let us give them misery." Bugles sound, hoofbeats drum frozen earth, and the raid begins. Frost feathers every saddle. Breath hangs in blue ropes behind 5,000 Union horses as General Stoneman's column leaves Knoxville. By noon, the cavalry skirts Strawberry Plains, a rail bridge still smoking from Gillam's demolition teams who rode out the night before. Telegraph wires dangle like black tinsel, each cut a blindfold across the Confederates' eyes. Stoneman allows no pause. "Speed first, triumph second," he tells an adjutant. The next day, the Clinch River rolls thick and brown beneath ice scurf. Engineers lash pontoon planks while sharpshooters fan upstream to keep guerrillas at a distance. Lieutenant George Nichols of the 7th Ohio scribbles in his pocket notebook, "Water bites like teeth, one slip and the current owns you. One mule does slip, crates of ammunition hiss and then vanish. The men curse and ride on." The climb over Clinch Mountain is next. Cavalrymen dismount, they lead their mounts, curse the slope. Hoof heels spark shale. Somewhere above, wind bullies the saplings so hard they squeal like wet hinges. Corporal Patrick Hanley would later testify, "I doubted God made land so steep before that day." Yet by dusk, the column tops the crest and spills into Poor Valley. Campfires are forbidden, however, and the men chew frozen hardtack in the dark, listening to wolves argue across the timber. December 12th, Bean Station falls without a shot. The local commander fled at dawn, leaving stovepipes lined to mimic artillery. Stoneman's scouts report bare rails ahead, undefended all the way to Kingsport. Orders: tear them up. Burbridge's Kentuckians leap from the saddle, drive spike mauls, flip 6-foot sections, soak ties with turpentine, and touch them off. Flames flicker oddly in sleet, orange ghosts dancing on white ground. One trooper mutters, "Looks like hell's fireplace." That night, sleet thickens to snow. Hooves drum 2 inches of powder, cartridge boxes ice over. Quartermasters issue extra blankets and a half gill of whiskey per man. Morale insurance, if you will. Yet speed never slackens. Stoneman's mantra rings down the column, "Cold men ride harder." It's now December 13th. Kingsport surrenders after a spatter of carbines. Union tack hammers echo inside the rail depot, while powder kegs are rolled under trestles. At 2 p.m., a captured locomotive, whistle tied open, thunders north with its throttle pinned, towing boxcars stuffed with burning cotton waste. 10 miles later, it leaves the tracks, a comet of sparks that set mileposts ablaze before exploding in a cut. Telegraph poles snap like wishbones. Confederate dispatch riders can only stare at the smoking wreckage. December 14th to 15th. Now into Virginia. The column crosses the state line at Bristol, past empty porches where women clutch shawls and stare but do not speak. Snow slants sideways, needling exposed skin until it's raw. Still, the blue tide rolls on. Palmer's Pennsylvania troopers are now in the lead, sabers sheathed to spare the horses' heaving lungs. Abingdon looms at dusk on the 15th. Defenders fire a token volley, then scatter east along the railroad. Union boots clatter over brick sidewalks. A handful of townsfolk peer from curtains as demolition squads set charges beneath the rolling stock repair shops. An officer lights the fuse before trotting away. Less than 60 seconds later, a roar lifts the slate shingles skyward and sends iron truck frames whirling like maple seeds. Private William Weeks would note in his diary, "The ground bucked like a horse. Window glass tinkled for a full minute after." December 16th. Sunrise reveals a white world streaked with blackened timbers. Stoneman now pivots northwest toward Wytheville, 40 miles off, intent on gutting the lead mines that feed Confederate bullet molds. March discipline tightens. Advance guard, main body, rear guard, each spaced to fold like an accordion if they're ambushed. They pass burned trestles, still radiating heat. Snow melts into creeks that hiss like tea kettles. There's a skirmish at Glade Spring. A company of the 64th Virginia opens from stone fences. Palmer wheels a section of rifles, drops 3 shells, and the defenders melt. Stoneman's staff marks the delay, 23 minutes, and reminds officers of their timetable. Wytheville by nightfall, Saltville 2 nights after that. The approach to Wytheville runs beside a railroad. Distant thunder ahead? Artillery? No. It's bursting powder stores. Gillam's scouts have beaten the main force, spiked 2 Parrott guns, and torched the rail yard. When Stoneman enters at 8 p.m. that evening, the only resistance is a half-starved company of Home Guard who surrender after a single volley. Union engineers swarm the town like carpenter ants. Rails are pried, ties are fired, telegraph huts axed apart. At Sweetwater Lead Works, the scene is almost operatic. Molten metal gushing from fractured crucibles, casting a hellish glow onto the snowfall. December 17th. The Army pivots southwest through Marion's narrow streets. Here, Confederate General Basil Duke appears with 2 brigades of dismounted cavalry determined to make his stand and halt the raid. A bitter, day-long fight sees volleys echo between clapboard houses, but Union flanking fire from a ridgeline sends Duke retreating towards Saltville. Stoneman's horse rears amidst spent shell casings. He steadies it and calls out, "The door stands open, gentlemen. Step through." December 18th. Rest is rationed. 4 hours sleep in shifts. Black coffee, cold bacon, saddles for pillows. The snow finally ceases and a hard moon sparks over crusted fields. Stoneman's scouts move ahead, counting campfires in Saltville's outer works. Fewer than a dozen, they report. The boilers are still belching, but the guard appears thin. December 20th, pre-dawn. The column splits. Gillam up the Holston River Road, Burbridge along the Rich Valley, Palmer hugging the south flank. All rendezvous on Chestnut Ridge by midnight. Artillery unlimbered under tarpaulins, gunners tamping charges with mittened hands. A captain whispers, "We end it before breakfast." 11:47 p.m. on December 20th. The moon hangs low, a thin coin behind a cobweb cloud. On Chestnut Ridge, 3 Union batteries crouch like iron predators. 8 3-inch ordnance rifles and 2 mountain howitzers, muzzles slanted toward the valley. Gunners work in whispers. Sight posts feathered with lard to mute squeaks. Linstocks wrapped in wool to hide sparks. Below them, Saltville lies half asleep, its boiler furnaces huffing orange breath, unaware that the rifles above have been pre-ranged during the twilight under the guise of scouting deer. 1,200 yards downslope in the scrub of Rich Valley Road, General Alvin Gillam's brigade forms a ragged line of horsemen, sabers unhooked, carbines cleared of snow. Across a narrow draw, Burbridge's Kentuckians crouch behind rotting fence rails. Redemption is tangible now, a drumbeat inside every ribcage. Palmer's Pennsylvanians, the southernmost column, have already dismounted and begun to snake through cedar thickets, aiming to seize the South Fork Bridge and seal the Confederate escape route. Just after midnight, Stoneman rides the ridge crest, hat brim silvered with frost. He addresses no one in particular, yet every nearby soldier hears him. Light them. A flare rocket skyward, green for fire, not airburst. Before the hiss dies, the ridge rifles speak. A flat, rippling crackle that slashes the night in half. Shells arc into town, timed fuses bursting above the boiler sheds. Iron fragments clang off kettles. tear through tin rooftops, and ricochet into the brine ponds with hissing plumes. In the streets of Saltville, Confederate pickets stumble from shanties, blinking at the sudden starfall. General Duke, roused from a parlor floor where he dozed in greatcoat and boots, gallops off toward Sanders Hill, shouting for the 4th Kentucky Cavalry to stand to arms. But telegraph lines are down, horse pickets are scattered. Orders travel no faster than a man can scream them. 12:12 a.m., and Burbridge's signal bugle calls the charge. 800 Kentuckians surge over corn stubble, carbines coughing fire and steam in the cold. Gillam's East Tennesseans pivot to the left, striking the flank of a hastily formed rebel skirmish line. The sound is thunder muffled by snow, rapid but oddly distant at times, as if war itself fights behind frosted glass. Confederate cannoneers swing 2 Napoleons into a battery atop Sanders Hill. They fire double canister, the grape shot whirling silver sparks through moonlight, but the guns are sighted for daylight and overshoot. Before they can be adjusted, Union troopers crest the hill with their revolvers out. A rebel lieutenant tries to spike his gun, but a saber catches the torch lance, flinging it away, and the cannon falls silent. By 12:25 a.m., in the southern sector, Palmer's advance guard reaches the South Fork Bridge to find only 4 militiamen shivering behind cotton bale parapets. 2 of them scatter immediately, the other pair surrender, hands trembling above their knit caps. Engineers rush forward with tar-soaked tow bundles, but Palmer waves them off. Hold the bridge. We'll need it outbound. General Duke attempts to rally the Confederates along the town's main street, shouting, levering a carbine with frost-stiff fingers, but Union artillery drops 2 percussion shells into the salting sheds behind him. Boiling brine fountains skyward, raining scalding droplets on scrambling Confederate soldiers. Panic ripples outward. Some Confederates throw muskets into troughs, yelling for mercy. Others sprint for the hills, only to collide with Pennsylvania pickets, closing the net around them. By 1 o'clock in the morning, organized resistance has collapsed. General Stoneman dismounts near the central wellhead and issues demolition orders as precise as that of a surgeon. Teams of pioneers with axes, sledges, cold chisels move plant to plant. Boiler number 3, firebox doors wedged open, 15 pounds of powder wired to the steam dome. Pump house, gear cogs jammed, main couplings split with steel wedges. The brine mains are cut, levered free, pitched into a trench like dead serpents. A lieutenant from the 12th Kentucky lights a slow match and steps back. The boiler erupts, an anvil loud concussion that shudders teeth and lofts iron plates the size of barn doors halfway across the works. Civilian residents watch from cellars and from doorways. Among them is 19-year-old Mary Preston Gray, the daughter of a salt contractor, who clutches a wool shawl and a notebook. She would later write to her cousin in Richmond, quote, "Imagine, Della, the river turned ghost white. The brine from burst vats rushed down like milk, steaming in the cold, and everywhere it flowed you could taste salt on the air as strong as tears," end quote. By 3:30 a.m., the night is filled with constant flashes as boiler after boiler, shed after shed, go up in flames. The flames climb 30 feet high, dyeing the snowpack orange. The smell is chemical in its metallic, mixed with scorched pork from commissary barrels that were kicked open and rolled into the blaze. Pioneers topple the gallows-framed derrick at well number 2. It collapses in sparks, timbers splitting like rifle reports. Stoneman walks the line with his pocket watch and a memorandum pad. Each objective checked, pumps wrecked, kettles cracked, pipe gallery demolished, sulfuric acid store drenched and spilled. He orders a final detail, salt, stockpiled for winter issue, estimated 100,000 bushels, shoveled into the boiling ponds now cooling in the night air. Men work by torchlight, flinging shovel loads until their shoulders are numb. Salt heaps hiss, dissolve, flood the flats with brine, too dilute for curing. Dawn on December 21st. Smoke pillars rise straight into a windless sky, their bases mirrored in slush pools that glitter like shattered glass. Where once a humming industrial heartbeat was day and night at work, only twisted iron and steaming pits remain. Confederate prisoners, about 400 in all, sit guarded on a hillside staring wordless at the ruins they once defended. One sergeant murmurs, "Looks like the Yankees salted the salt." No reply comes. Union casualties are fewer than 50, most of them from skirmish fire and premature powder blast. Confederate dead are perhaps twice that, many in scattered pockets who refused to surrender. But the true casualty is logistical. With Saltville gone, the Confederacy has lost its last reliable cure for meat, its midwinter supply of leather, and medical brine. At a little after 9 a.m., Stoneman gives the order to withdraw. Burbridge's brigade leads, escorting prisoners across the still intact South Fork Bridge. Gillem follows with the artillery, caissons rattling, horse hooves splashing through thin sheets of salted meltwater. Palmer's Pennsylvanians ride last, torches ready in case any structure still smolders only half-heartedly. By noon, the blue column winds west, leaving behind a valley drained of its purpose, a white crust forming on every blackened timber. Saltville's empire had stood for generations. It fell in 6 hours. Boilers cooled, brine spilled, and the lifeline of an army evaporated into winter air heavy with salt and smoke. The Appalachians would remember that dawn, the echo of bursting iron. The river turned to brine, as the moment the Southern war machine began to starve in earnest. Noon on the 21st of December, with Saltville boiling in its own ruins, General Stoneman turns the column south toward Marion. The prisoners shuffle inside a hollow square of sabers, the wrecked valley receding behind them like a fever dream. No bands are playing, only shod hooves slap salted mud that whitens leather and horsehair alike. 6 miles out, the lead elements halt at the Upper Holston Ford, where ice rims every rock. Pioneers break the skim with axe heads, laughing through chattering teeth that they're stirring rebel soup. By dusk, all 12 regiments have splashed across, campfires still forbidden. Men chew raw bacon and whisper that the war finally smells close to finished. The next day, the 22nd, Marion's rail depot lies charred from the fight 2 nights earlier, but the Jackson lead mines are still smoldering. Engineers linger just long enough to tumble remaining pump shafts, collapse adits with kegs of powder, and pitch ladles into the shafts, final stitches in the wound inflicted on Confederate industry. Skirmishers of General Duke's retreating cavalry snipe from cedar breaks on Walker's Creek, but they lack both powder and also heart. A single volley from Palmer's Pennsylvania carbines is enough to scatter them. Captain Ira Thompson notes in his journal, quote, "Graybacks rode like smoke on a gale, present, then gone," end quote. Christmas Eve finds the column near Jonesboro, Tennessee, snow flurries swirling around them. Quartermasters issue double coffee and a gill of captured peach brandy. Chaplain Robert West holds a brief service besides stacked carbines, reading Luke's Nativity by lantern, his breath rising in halos of steam. A chorus of tired voices hums Silent Night, half a verse before sleep claims them. The last miles home are a frozen blur. Over the clinch once more, through Bean's Station's gutted inns, across Strawberry Plains where Union repair crews already have mended the bridge Stoneman burned at the raid's beginning. On New Year's Day, 1865, the column rides into Knoxville to muffled cheers. Fewer than 100 casualties sustained across 25 days and 300 winter miles. Prisoners delivered, rail still broken, salt and lead works erased. Stoneman drafts his final report that evening, One line stands out above the rest. The lifelines of the rebellion in the Southwest are severed beyond immediate repair. And so the raiders disband to winter quarters, boots still crushed with salt, sabers rust-flecked from the sleet. Behind them, the Confederacy enters its last hungry spring, with meat uncured, leather untanned, cartridges short of lead. Proof that a valley few Northerners could find on a map had become the fulcrum on which a nation's fate tilted. It would be wrong of me to share the story of the two Saltville raids, including the story of the Saltville massacre, and not give a follow-up to what happened to Champ Ferguson. I alluded to it a little bit in the first episode, but I want to describe the events that unfolded in later 1865. It's Nashville, Tennessee, July 11th, 1865. In the former federal courthouse on Cedar Street, a 10-man military commission convenes its most infamous case of the war. The accused is Champ Ferguson. Gray homespun coat, iron shackles, beard untrimmed since Appomattox. He stands 5 paces from the bench, eyes fixed on the blue uniformed panel that will decide whether he lives or dies. The charge sheet lists 53 murders in violation of the laws and customs of war. Lines 21 through 32 describe Saltville by name, the pistol deaths of wounded black troopers, the execution of Lieutenant Elza Smith, the bayoneting of stretcher bearers. When the clerk finishes reading, Ferguson folds his arm and says only, "I done what war required." Over 70 witnesses file through the summer heat. Union surgeons, Confederate deserters, mountain women who watched sons vanish on lonely roads. Corporal William Harris of the 5th Colored Infantry testifies that he pretended death beneath straw while Ferguson, quote, walked the barn like a man inspecting hogs, shooting those he fancied, end quote. A hush folds the gallery. Ferguson's defense rests on 2 claims: that guerrillas answer to no flag, and that Unionists were killed in open combat. Prosecutor Major Thomas Barton counters with a single question: were the men at Saltville armed, or were they bleeding on stretchers? He's met with silence as an answer. On September 26th, it's the day of the verdict. The commission finds Champ Ferguson guilty on all counts. He receives the news stone-faced, then asks for 3 things: a pipe, a Bible, and time to see his wife. Army regulations grant 2 of those requests. 3 weeks later, October 20th, 1865, at 1:11 p.m., at the edge of the Nashville barracks yard, Ferguson mounts the gallows steps, glances toward the Cumberland River shimmering beyond rooftops, and says, "I am not afraid to die." The trap door drops. History records the fall at 8 feet, his neck broken clean. He's one of just 3 men executed after the war for what we know today as war crimes. With that final thud, the Saltville massacre passes from a battlefield rumor to legal fact. Now we know that justice is imperfect. Nothing will bring back those whose lives were taken. But the rope that closes on Champ Ferguson's throat draws a line the nation vows not to cross again. Even in civil war, some acts deserve special justice. So what impact did the Saltville Raid actually have on the Confederate war effort? Well, we do have some details about that. First, let's talk about the salt. Before the raid, Richmond's Commissary General Lucius Northrop allotted each soldier roughly 5 pounds of salt per month, enough to cure bacon, season cornmeal, and keep rations from spoiling on the march. In January 1865, with Saltville's mines silent, memos slashed that issue to 2 3/4 pounds, less than half of what it was before. Brigade quartermasters from Lee's army complained that raw pork now reached the trenches, ropey and rank, sometimes crawling with maggots after only 3 days. A Virginia private wrote home, "We scrape the slime, boil the rest, and pray the taste is not death." What about leather? Tanners across the South relied on Saltville brine to pickle hides before finishing. By February, the Ordnance Bureau reported a shortfall of 43,000 pairs of infantry brogans. Commanders pleaded for soldiers to mend their own shoes, but soles stitched with candle wick and pine pitch dissolved on the winter roads. Barefoot pickets paced the frozen lines at Petersburg, wrapping their toes in rags and rawhide. Next came the medical stores. Surgeons had used saturated brine as a crude disinfectant and to pack amputated limbs for shipment to rear hospitals. Deprived of salt, they turned to weak vinegar, less effective, prone to sour. Infection rates in Confederate field wards spiked. One hospital in Danville recorded that 3 of every 5 amputees died, where the number had been 2 of 5 the year before. Logistically, the disaster rippled along rails already fraying. With Saltville gone, the War Department tried to import salt from coastal pans in Florida, but Union blockaders stalked the Gulf like sharks. The alternative was rail haul from the Carolinas, Wilmington to Charlotte, Charlotte to Greensboro, Greensboro to Danville, and then on to the Petersburg front, a 400-mile thread already strained by the shipments of corn, powder, and wounded. Sheridan's cavalry would cut the South Side tracks in March. When that seal snapped, the last trickle of salt stopped dead. Morale suffered in ways that no ration chart could capture. Newspapers in Richmond spun frantic editorials. "Saltville may be rebuilt by spring." And it's actually true. If you look at the details, they did get the saltworks up and running, at least on a partial basis, within about 2 months of the raid. But by that point, the damage had been done, and the war was nearly over. Saltville's destruction, a single night's work, radiated forward into every commissary ledger, every frost-cracked boot sole, every fevered field hospital. It may have shortened the war, not by any grand battle, but by a steady erosion that set Grant and Sherman's armies up for ultimate success just a few months later. It's important to talk about how these events are viewed today. I did some studying, obviously, in preparing for this podcast, and been doing a lot of research, not only because of my own family connections, but also in preparing to be able to present all of this information to you. And I found that there is, in fact, a lot of debate, especially among those who have a Southern bias. Those that you might even argue on the extreme end would come from the lost cause narrative. Those who argue that there was no Saltville massacre. Those who argue that if black soldiers were killed, it was 2 or 3, and they may have been fighting back, so that it really can't be considered a war crime. Or they argue that no uniformed Confederate soldiers were involved, and that may or may not be the case. We know from excerpts of testimony that there were some Confederate officers, especially medical officers on the scene, who did eventually put a stop to the massacre. And we don't know how high up the chain of command the events were ordered or even known. It may be that the buck stops with Champ Ferguson, but we definitely know something happened. The numbers is really the only thing that's in any sort of debate. The other thing I encountered was a strong opinion by those who sympathize with the South that the raid on Saltville constituted itself a war crime, and that murdering black soldiers in response was only responding to crime with crime, and that they canceled each other out in effect. But what we see by this point in the war, by late in 1864, whether it be Sherman's march to the sea, the raid on Saltville, it's clear evidence that the nature of war was changing. Now, there had always been an element in warfare of destroying the enemy's ability to make war, but the Union did take this to the next level. They went after the will to fight by the Confederacy. It's very similar to what you see with blockades of continental Europe during the Napoleonic Wars, the blockade of the German ports during World War I. It's what we see with bombing of factories in World War II. It's industrialized warfare being fought at the source of that industry, removing the fuel, removing the bullets, removing the industry that feeds the war machine. In a sense, it's a little bit of ahead of its time. But I leave that to each one of you to decide what is a war crime and what is simply war. Thanks for listening.